Like in the sense that I'm using
I
it.
don't. I don't. To be clear, you need some like. I'm not sure that I'm granting rigid designators make sense. Like I mean, it's okay. So refer to the same object in all possible worlds. To say that there's a same object across worlds, you need some notion of transworld identity, right? So, it seems like talk of rigid designation is gonna probably require some kind of talk of transworld identity. Um, so what does it even mean to be the same object like across possible worlds? I mean, I'm happy to. If in fact, I don't want to make you clarify that. It's just like if we understand that, like, as long as we understand that it's some notion of like transworld identity or something we're talking about here, because it's like it's not literally the same object. Um,
Yeah.
not I don't know what the other kind of identity is called. I forget, but as long as I understand, it's not that kind of identity.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I want to actually pull up my notes because, um, yeah, there's literally a modal argument for this exact type of thing. It
What
goes
is
under like
this thing?
gone. So yeah. So obviously, I don't fully understand it myself. However, I do have like a basic kind of like understanding. So it's not comprehensive, but it's like a demonstration of a posteriori necessity. Does that make sense? 1 second. I'll
Um,
actually get the argument for it.
and just with, I was just gonna say with the rigid designation stuff, I think I was just trying to understand if I think that concept makes sense, and I think I'm just saying that as long as we're clear about what we mean when we say same in different possible worlds, as long as we have like some notion of transworld identity that's not like crazy or anything, I think that I'm probably okay with that idea.
Okay. Well, I'm going completely without knowledge of what Saul Kripke actually means by that. I'm kind of just like throwing
What?
this into like a think tank, if
I
anything.
Oh, I thought that I thought that like the whole thing was gonna be all about like rigid designators. So I was like, okay, I better look up what the fuck. I mean, see if I think they exist or what.
Hmm.
Okay, so well, what's the proposition that you're trying to establish? Maybe that would be a good way to start. Like, what's the thing that you're trying to, I guess, convince me of?
Um, Basically, what I mean by it would seem so. The proposition would be like it would seem that. Let me try and think to phrase this so it's not like continental gibberish.
Okay.
Um, Basically, it would seem like in virtue of like there's a problem with demonstrating premises in a way that doesn't require further inferences if we focus solely on first order logic or any form of logic. So,
Okay, wait. Can we just spend? Okay. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Are you right now telling me what you're trying to end up at, or are you giving me some inference that kind of gets you there? Because that's something I could talk like quite a lot about. What you just said there about worries about the need for always more premises. Like that's like we have to talk about like epistemology and like contextualism and what we mean by need, what's the modality there, and I think concerns like that kind of break down. So is that actually, are you giving me an inference right now, or are you actually spelling out the thing you're trying to convince me of?
I think I'm trying to spell out what I'm trying to convince. So I'm not
Okay, so
exactly
in
at the
that,
inference stage.
okay, if you're okay, so then that's enough already. We like you can spell out the rest of it, but that part right there where you're saying, I forget your phrasing, but where you were trying to say there's like some kind of like problem with first order logic and premises and where do premises end, or I'm not sure exactly, but that kind of stuff I'm not convinced there's like any problem there. I think people like confuse themselves or something.
Oh yeah. Like I don't
um
think that there's a problem with first order logic per se. I probably phrased that poorly. So all I'm saying
well,
is,
no, it's kind of like an epistemic. Okay, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say like in the case where you were talking to the majesty of reason, I believe there was a certain part in the conversation where you guys kind of like bottomed out, and it was just like you guys couldn't get each other's concepts, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, he has all my concepts,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
but I don't think he would disagree with me when I say that the concept lacking is one directional there, at least
yeah,
with respect to what we were talking about.
yeah. True, true, true. Okay, so in the case of like concept acquisition, which would seem to be like the subject, like that is like blocking the ability of the conversation to resume further. You guys are kind of like bottomed out at that. Would you agree with that characterization, or have I said it poorly again?
Um, as long as talking about concept acquisition doesn't presuppose that the realist has, like, I don't know, like, I'm not sure it refers to anything when they say some of these terms, and I'm not sure if there is like a concept behind the term. So as long as concept acquisition isn't baking in that they're expressing a concept, I guess. Sure.
Yeah, 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 100%. So, like, I think
Like
you
concept
pointed to something.
acquisition, whether there is a concept to acquire or not.
Yeah. So, um, how would you be able
Like
to
if you
demonstrate?
sorry if you
Sorry, go
ask
ahead.
can I just say it's just like if you ask me to for my language though, because right now like I'm trying to go, oh, concept acquisition, is that an okay way to describe it? But if you just ask me how it what would I say, I would say it's like a problem of conceptual disparity, which is the language Joe gave it.
Yeah.
And the idea is just like, yeah, someone lacks a concept that another person has. That's where I would focus. But yeah, you could talk about it in terms of acquisition though, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So I think now that we've got this kind of like set up, established, I think I can just pose the question really about. Sorry,
but
sorry.
but wait, why the question? I thought I'm still trying to understand what is it that you're trying to establish?
I'm trying to sell you something. I'm trying to
Yeah, and
sell
what
you.
is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it
So,
moral realism? Is this all
no, no,
going to
no, no,
be
no.
that 5 minutes into this or 10 minutes and it's like, and it's moral realism?
Yeah, no, no, no. It's more so like, wouldn't it be cool to be able to definitively prove whether or not someone has a concept, and then over and above that, how would you be able to determine that a concept like obtains or refers to something actually true of the world?
Okay, well, I don't know what you're trying to convince me of. Like, if you're just trying to ask me questions, like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, Lance feels the same way. Like, he doesn't, he's not satisfied. I don't think with just saying to the realist, like, I have no clue what the fuck you're talking about, and like, I want you to you need to convey your concept to me if you want the conversation to progress. He thinks he can say that, and that there's more that can probably be said. Like he thinks there's probably some kind of epistemic problem where you can actually show that they don't have access to the concept or something like this. I don't want to straw man Lance, but like he thinks so that, I think in the most simple terms, like he's kind of more inclined to think there's some kind of epistemic like disparity there, and some way to show who's like. Well, it sounds like I'm saying he thinks there's stance independent shit, so that's not what I'm saying. I don't fucking know, but anyway, well, sorry, what the fuck was your question? Say that again, Darren.
So I was just saying, like, wouldn't it be useful or wouldn't it be cool if we had a
Yeah,
way, like a systematic way
yeah,
to determine
yeah,
which concepts are, yeah, etc.
yes, yeah. So I agree. It would be great if we had a way to prove who has which concept, or like which concepts make sense or something like that. Like, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to establish that. I just don't know. I don't really know how we would like do that though. Maybe there's like neuroscience or something. It doesn't even sound like a question for philosophy.
Yeah, like so I don't actually have the solution. This is the thing. I'm not exactly trying to sell you on the solution. I'm trying to sell you on the well, the urge that well, this is something we should definitely look into. It would obviously be of use to philosophers to resolve
Yeah,
debate over gibberish.
I yeah, I literally sent a voice message today to Lance where I was agreeing with him I'm saying I think that it would be good. Like, if someone wants to put in the time and do that kind of investigation, like whether they dig anything up or not, it would just be interesting to see what comes up there when you start trying to look at, like, okay, is there some way to show a difference of epistemic footing with respect to like concept possession or something? Like, I do think that's interesting. I don't think I care enough to sit there actually trying to do that, but I hope someone does, and I will be interested when they do.
Yeah, for sure. So,
Yeah,
a thought came to mind and it literally just left the building. Um,
that's okay. Well, I mean, was that like all you were kind of was saying in that original message when you're saying you want something else than FOL? It's like you're just kind of. It seemed like you're saying there's something inadequate about FOL or something, but
oh no.
yeah.
Like, FOL is absolutely like it. It obviously works. It's great. I don't see that there's any problems with it per se because like its main goal is to operate over inferences, right? So the question is, what other resources would we have available to us to basically resolve issues relating to concept acquisition that isn't just inference? Because it seems that inference may be uh, inadequate in this sense. So not formal logic per se, but like inference itself may not be adequate to in a way that doesn't just simply like not like beg the question, but require further justification of like
Wait,
premises.
now you're saying the stuff I don't understand again. What do you mean? What is inference inadequate for exactly?
So it seems that it's inadequate to like establish its own premises. So
Inference doesn't have premises. Inference is not an
yes,
inference.
sorry, I'm using words really loosely here. Yeah, so
Yeah.
for lack of better word use, um, so yeah, I hate to speak so informally, but this is like the only way I can kind of approximate what I'm trying to talk about, and yeah, I always struggle with that, but so yeah, fuck, I'm trying to think where would we go from here. I mean, I can take some
Well,
time and try and give you something
like,
that is formally valid and stuff like
well,
that.
it's not that it has to be formally valid. It's just it's that you sometimes you say things that don't make sense to me. Like you said the premises of inference. I know what it means for an inference to have premises, but like inference, I think that was just inference the label there, right? Just the thing. We don't say inference the concept. Like, sorry, I don't know exactly how to articulate that, but yeah, it's not a problem about validity. It's just a problem about you use the word sometimes in a way that I just don't understand what the fuck that means. Like, what do you mean when you say the premises of inference? Like, there aren't every individual inference has premises, or at
Yeah,
least a premise, right? But when you say the premises of inference, what is going on there? Like, is inference just a label that you're referring to, or is inference, we're talking about inference the thing, in which case the thing does not have a set of premises, right?
yeah, no, yeah. So I think the formal way in which you described it was what I meant. Basically, that like inferences have premises.
Okay, inferences have premises.
Yeah. So
We agree on that. We
yeah.
definitely have agreement about that.
Would you agree that there's some sort of like conditional nature of uh like inferences premises? So they don't prove the premises, they prove the conclusion. Or they entail the conclusion. They don't entail their premises.
Would I agree that premises entail the conclusion?
No, inferences entail conclusions, but they do not entail their premises. I mean, it's kind of like really, yeah, this sounds
Well,
very
an
pedantic, but
inference
yeah.
an inference will entail its conclusion if it's valid. That's what it means to be a valid inference.
Yeah, so valid
But
inferences. Okay.
an inference needn't entail its conclusion, right?
Yeah.
That's just what makes an inference invalid, but it's still an inference.
Okay, so then I should have added the qualification logical inferences. So like logically valid inferences.
Yeah, logically valid inferences have premises which entail their conclusions. That's true.
Yeah. So I guess the question is basically
You also said and not themselves. I don't know if this is a side point, but you could have a premise which entails the conclusion and which entails it entails itself. It's a tautology. Yeah, so you could have a tautology that entails some conclusion and also entails itself, right? Tautology.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's
So
that's
I
true.
don't.
Yeah.
So when you say that, that entails the conclusion and not themselves, I think they can entail the conclusion and also entail themselves. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, what were you trying to say from there?
Yeah, so essentially what would be the way in which we would be able to determine like correct premises from the outset?
What do you mean determine correct premises? Like, it's like correct as in like true? Correct as in correct with respect to some other norm, like getting a sound argument? Like, what do you mean by correct there?
So like I mean correct as in the proposition like denotes something that's like a fact in reality. So not just simply that it's like true by formalism, but it's also it refers to something in the world.
So, sorry, now I'm so confused. How do we get premises that refer to things in the world? I don't know if I understood whatever that is correctly. How do we get premises that do what?
That let me try and word this. Okay, so premises that would actually like accurately describe what is the actual state of affairs type thing. How do we derive
Premises
that?
that are true?
Yeah, how do we derive that like oh not necessarily
How
like
do
true
we
by
how do
formalism,
we
I mean factual.
I don't really get that distinction. I
Um
Are you asking how we know that premises are true in an argument?
I yeah,
Or
let's go with that
how we
interpretation. I'll let
justify
you
it?
know if that's not sorry.
Or are you asking how we justify it? Like, are you asking how we justify the premises of an argument? Like, if I have some argument for the proposition Q, and then I have some premise in that argument, and someone wants to question that premise, how do we justify that premise? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Well, assuming there is a justification, you provide another inference.
Mm. Okay, so is there a point at which that process like terminates?
What do you mean when you say okay? So when you say is there a point? So obviously we know we're orbiting around this kind of territory, like the Munchausen trilemma stuff, right? Um, so when you say is there a point where it terminates, it's like someone could just keep giving further and further inferences if they want to. Someone could just try to keep providing a train of deduction. There's nothing that in principle stops it from just going on. So I guess how exactly did you phrase your question?
Yeah, so basically just where does it
Sorry,
terminate?
my headphones died for a second there.
That's okay. So I was just
Yeah,
asking.
but when you
Go
ask
on.
where does it terminate, I mean, are you talking about like in a converse? Like this is why I think this is where I think we're getting into the weird realism shit. And I don't know,
Yeah.
if realism is probably the wrong word, but we're gonna need to talk about like contextualism here.
Okay.
So like when the time comes. So yeah, and if my headphones die, I'll try to switch the computer, but my mic was giving me trouble earlier. Well, I can plug these in, I guess, but then I can't clean. Okay. Yeah. So Munchausen trilemma reasons. Oh yeah. What was your phrasing again? Where's the termination point? Okay. So so it's phrasing like the termination point that I think is weird, right? Like it's as if you're talking about reason like this like a weird abstract object or something almost that's like out there floating somewhere and either goes on forever or doesn't. Like I don't understand like the way that you're thinking about the concept of a termination point is making me go termination point of what? In the same way as like when a realist about morality talks about like, they start talking about something that's just good, and I kind of go like, wait, but good with respect to what goal, right? Because it's like my understanding of good is that it's like with respect to something. So yeah, when you talk about where does it terminate, I'm not understanding what it is. I don't think there's this like weird categorical or like platonic fucking object out there or something. I think that there are conversations that people have with each other, and that in one of those conversations, someone may like provide inferences. They may not. Theoretically, you could have a possible world that's just someone infinitely providing inferences. Like, I don't know. So yeah, we have to basically get clarity about what you mean when you say the termination point. The termination point of what? Inferences is some kind of like abstract object or something, or the inference that I made in this conversation, or what? What do you mean there?
So I'm speaking generally about inferences, and what I'm asking is if the premises require justification.
When we say
And
wait,
sorry.
right there. So I'm watching the normative words. When you say require justification, require is with respect to a norm. What norm are we talking about?
Okay, so if someone doesn't have like the concepts that you're using in your premises, say for instance, the norm would be probably the norms that are true in meaning. So,
Okay. When
fuck,
when
man.
you say something is required, are you saying it's required in some weird realist sense, or are you saying it's required according to some goal we have?
Yeah, that's
Because
second
when
one.
you okay, so when you say the premises are required, right, according to what goal?
Oh yeah, okay, no, I see
Or you can
where you'd
just
be going.
avoid, if there's a way to avoid language that's normative. We don't need to ask that. But the second the normative language is there, I'm asking according to what norm?
Yeah, it'd be like the norm of concept acquisition, but that may not be your goal type thing, you know? So yeah, this wouldn't yeah. My sales pitch may not land here, essentially.
Well, yeah, because like I think that questions about like the Munchausen stuff, like infinitism and foundationalism and um,
Coherentism.
coherentism. Yeah, I feel like that kind of like maybe I just need to read more about it, but I often feel when I look at things in philosophy that there's like some fundamental weirdness about like how things are being talked about. Like when we talk about, I guess you know what? I don't want to like butcher this. I just want to literally go read from a source exactly how they frame it, so I don't say something stupid. All right. Let's see. No. Um. hmm.
I think I've got a
I might
good
just have
contextual way
to.
to frame it as well, by the way.
Okay. I'm surprised that I'm not finding a IEP entry on that. It's probably in just something on basic epistemology, but whatever. Okay.
Mhm.
In epistemology, I'm just reading the wiki one instead. In epistemology, the Munchausen trilemma, also commonly known as the Agrippin trilemma, is a thought experiment intended to demonstrate that the theoretical impossibility of proving any truth. Um, Even in the fields of logic and mathematics, without appealing to accepted assumptions. Um, if it is asked how any given proposition is known to be true, proof may be provided. Um, if it is asked how any given proposition is known to be true, proof may be provided. Yet that same question can be asked of the proof and any subsequent proof. The Munchausen trilemma is that there are only three ways of completing the proof. Right. Yeah. So yeah, just let me think about the best way to express this. I guess that we have to just the only way that I can really think of how to explain this is we have to understand words like proof or justification. Oh man, I got it. My buddy
Now you're
keeps
sounding like
accidentally
me.
calling me. Sorry, my buddy keeps accidentally calling me. You keep calling me on Discord. On Discord. Um. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Ah, fuck, my headphones died. 1 second. It's just a disaster today.
Nah, that's fine.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Um, right. So Munchausen, trilemma. Fuck, let me plug these headphones in too. Um, second. Sorry, this is because all day I've been doing this fucking cleaning, so it's just like it's such a disaster in here. Like I need to make food, like it's just fucked.
We can always
Um,
pick this up at another time if you want. Totally up
no,
to you.
no, 1 second. No, I'm gonna get off in a second because I don't have my headphones anymore, and I fucked my mic somehow installing this server. I spent like fucking like 10 minutes today talking to Fedo on silent. Okay, sorry. So, okay, what were we talking about? Munchausen trilemma. And oh yeah, right. So the problem is when we talk about like words like proof, right? Proof or justification. It's just that like I think that we have to understand those words contextually. Like, what does it mean to prove something? So, I mean, I take or to provide justification. Like, I take it that it's to show that it follows deductively from some set of premises. And I think whatever premises you start from, at the base level at any given time, right? Whatever you're taking for granted for the purpose of any particular inference, which can vary from inference to inference, that set of propositions that you take for granted at the outset is what forms the epistemic context, right? So you're always operating in some given epistemic context. So
Yeah.
when we talk about whether a proposition can be shown to be true, or like all this language is like you have to be careful because it's like with the realism stuff where there's a broader notion of shown or proven or justified that kind of slips in, and you have to like disambiguate that into like normal talk, and then it just doesn't seem weird anymore. So when we talk about prove, if we mean prove, if we understand that term as contextual, then we're going to really always be implicitly saying prove in this given epistemic context. So we might, for instance, have a mundane context like the context in which we discuss a proposition, typically like what you had for breakfast, right? Like I'm assuming the reliability of sense perception, the existence of the external world. Sorry, am I still coming through?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, thank God. Yeah, the existence of the external world, probably like other minds, probably grant that when I'm talking to you about breakfast. I'm probably granting that you're like an honest agent. Like these are things that are just not really in question. They're like part of the context we're operating in. So
Yeah.
within a context like that, it's like straightforward to prove that you had so and so for breakfast, or you saw a car outside, or whatever. But if we shift into a skeptical context and we take a lot of those propositions out of the starting set, which is again like the set of propositions that forms the epistemic context, or worst of all, it's just the null set, then there's no way to get your picture. We limit the set massively. We take away like the existence of the external world, the uniformity of causation, the existence of other minds, like all of the kind of perennial philosophical questions, we enter an epistemic context where we are agnostic about those things. Like, you're going to have a very hard time proving anything, right? And I almost feel like I could give a little more detail on contextualism before continuing, but I don't want to like belabor the point. But I could kind of explain a bit more about what motivates the view. Should I do that, or should I just continue?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so like, so we have different propositions, and this is basically, I think, what you'll see on probably any description of contextualism, because it's like a very standard way to talk about it. I know it's what the SEP talks about, but anyway, yeah. So say that we have a proposition like that. You're talking to me right now on Discord, right? You want to say, just generally speaking, colloquially speaking, you'd say you know that, yes?
Yeah.
I know I'm talking to Isaac right now on Discord. Now, on the other hand, if I were to ask you about whether you think that you might be a brain in a vat, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I probably said that I know I'm not a brain in a vat, but like obviously,
Okay,
I
but
don't
you're a crazy
know
realist.
how.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
you're a bad example, but you understand that there's
Okay.
a massive amount of people who are going to say, "I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat."
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
you should be able to understand what motivates the view, even if you don't hold those motivations because you think you've like solved the problem or something.
Of course.
So yeah, right. So a lot of people, they want to answer. They want to say they have knowledge that they of what they ate for breakfast, but they don't have knowledge that they're not a brain in a vat. But on an invariant concept of knowledge, right, or justification, or whichever, it's the same for both. We're gonna have a, like, how the fuck are we going to explain that kind of usage of the term, right? Like, if you don't know whether you're a brain in a vat, there's no fucking way you know that you had breakfast, right? Knowing that you had breakfast assumes that you know that you're not a brain in a vat, right? The breakfast could have just been simulated, unless it, like, knowing you had breakfast entails something about whether you're a brain in a vat, right? So if you don't know you're not a brain in a vat, you definitely don't know what you had for breakfast. And if you know what you had for breakfast, you know you're not a brain in a vat, right? So people notice that tension, but still feel that, I want to say I know both. That seems like an appropriate use of the term. So that's kind of like the motivation for contextualism. It's like, maybe our notion of justification actually has to vary in some kind of way to be appropriately applied in both of those contexts. Yeah, and then the basic scheme that is kind of like what I said. It's like, that's the motivation. Then the kind of way to think about it is just, you always have some given starting set, and to be justified is just to be inferable from that starting set. So when you ask me how any given proposition is justified, so now we're like full circle. We talk about like the Munchausen stuff. When you ask like, how can you show that? How can you prove that? I'm in the same way as when I talk to a realist and I zero in on what they mean by words like ought or should when they use them in a non-relativistic way, like in a non-stance dependent way or whatever. I'm zeroing in on that usage of proof as being used in an invariant way. I'm going, well, if you mean some kind of invariant notion of proof, aka that means that basically a proposition, it's like, we're basically be talking about something that's provable from like the empty set or something. It's like, I don't think I can prove things like that, right? So if we're talking about some invariant notion of proof, I don't know that there's anything. Like, I'm basically just a skeptic about it. I don't know how to even think about that, right? If we're talking about proof within some given context, well then, yeah, it may very well be able to provide that, right? So yeah, so when you ask me about things that use words like proof or justify or whatever, I'm disambiguating what I think is an invariant notion of proof and saying, yeah, I can give proofs in these contexts, but not in those.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's actually a very useful concept. Let me try to think where to go from
Yeah,
here.
so with that in place, now if you still think there's some kind of like horrible problem to resolve, like I'm open to hear it, but I don't know what the epistemic like worry really is there if it's not just now. Like, it took a long time to lay that groundwork. I'm sorry for having to go on so long, but but it's also, I can ultimately say this basically, like, if the worry there isn't just you're using some invariant notion of justification that's like spooking you out in some kind of way, and you're like worried how to defeat like some kind of insane like skepticism, like if that's what's going on, like, yeah, I just think that that comes from thinking in the wrong way about epistemic terms. They're like contextual.
Now,
I'm not convinced there's a problem.
Yeah. So, I think I do still I agree with you when you say that when you're saying that you don't think that there's a problem. I think I actually do agree with that, but what my pitch is essentially is, would it be better, like, on top of that, like, be able to demonstrate contextualism or demonstrate the assumptions of contextualism?
What do you mean demonstrate contextualism?
So, okay, so now in this context, we're talking about like proof in maybe an invariant sense again. So,
Well, when you use the word exactly. So okay, I'm glad you picked up on that. That's
yeah,
exactly what I was going to say, right? Like, when you say demonstrate, that's another epistemic term, right? So is that being used in an invariant sense?
yeah.
And if so, like, I'm not committed to the view that you can demonstrate contextualism, right?
Mm. Okay, right. But would it be good for you to be able to do that?
Good. Like, do I have a desire to be able to prove things in any epistemic context?
Oh
I
yeah,
don't
shit.
particularly
Fuck.
care. Not really.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, okay.
I
So
mean, there's
yeah,
probably some contexts that are like important. Like, I probably care about, like, maybe like if you talk about like vegan discussion, or if you talk about like, like my math homework. Like, there's contexts where I care about being able to justify things
right. Okay, so you'd be a
within
hard
some
sell.
context.
Yeah, you'd be a hard sell. Yeah, I'd have to be talking to a realist essentially.
What? Yeah, but why are you like? What? Like, what? What's the? I don't understand. It sounds like you still think there's some problem, but now I don't know what the problem is. Like, if it can you? Sorry, I'm getting a lot of echo from you. It's tripping
Oh,
me out.
sorry,
It's
sorry,
like a
sorry.
voice scrambler.
Give me one
Um.
sec. I'll have to put my earphones in.
Okay.
Alright, one sec. All right, can you hear me?
Yeah. I forget where we were, but oh yeah, like, so I feel so the Munchausen trilemma stuff, right? It's like, it's a circular, regressive, like I think that I think that that I'm not sure exactly how to say that. What I want to say is that's a problem with invariant justification, how exactly to frame this. But I just feel like being really concerned about something like that. Well, yeah, to even in fact, I'm trying to understand if what I'm saying right now diffuses this problem, or just gives us some kind of alternative. Maybe I should think about that for a second here. But I was going to say, I'm not clear about what you think the problem is at this point, if it's not some kind of concern that's being generated by like expecting invariant justification or something.
Yeah, so my pitch is not to solve a problem, but to improve our current methods. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
so I guess yeah, I think that what I have is, I think I answer the Munchausen trilemma by taking the kind of foundationalist answer, right, in a sense,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to talk about properly basic beliefs. So in that way, it's like not foundationalist. Like, the sense that it's foundational is, I grant that proof has to proceed from certain starting points, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I just take it that we have to look at the concept of proof differently and have different expectations of what we're trying to do. We just
Yeah.
want to say, oh, we're proving something within this context or that context, right? So if you ask how proof is given for any proposition, assuming that it is a proposition that can be proven in a given epistemic context, the proof is given in a deductive manner from something in the starting set, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like a kind of foundationalist answer in a way. You're like you're like starting set that I'm not going to argue for, and I infer things from there. But it's really also adding this kind of analysis of the concept of justification that just shows that we're just kind of like misguided when we look for this like weird, like crazy invariant justification, and that a contextual notion seems to like capture what we're talking about. And I'm just not sure what's missing there. I'm not sure. Yeah, so I guess, and so now I'm just kind of, I don't really know what the problem is anymore. Like, what are you worrying about here?
Yeah, so like I said before, I'm not worried about any sort of problem per se. That's why I agreed with you earlier that I don't think that there is a problem per se. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it's not even like a suggestion per se. It's literally, it's posed as a question. Like, what if we're able to improve over and above contextualism, like our ways of justification that enables us to actually determine or demonstrate, once again, using the invariance kind of like context, contextualism itself, determine or justify that. So if we were able to do that, then I think a lot more people would understand like how contextualism works. So if your goal is to defend the position of contextualism, surely this would be in your interests.
To be able to show that it's true. well, no. If you, well, I guess it depends how you think about contextualism. I'm not. So, what are you saying is good right here? Being able to give an invariant proof that 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 well, it's hard because contextualism is almost like a linguistic analysis more than like a proposition. So it's not. I'm not even sure what we mean by prove contextualism. Like it's just an understanding of what we mean when we say terms, like justifying terms. So I don't really. I think earlier I talked about proving contextualism, but I think it's because it was phrased in some different way that made it sound like it was a proposition about contextualism or something. I don't really know what it would mean to prove contextualism, because contextualism isn't like a proposition.
Okay, could you elaborate on that?
It's kind of like an analysis of what we mean with terms like justify or prove or demonstrate. It's like it's like a analysis of how we use those words.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes
Right?
sense.
It's just going. We can use these words in a contextual way, and then we don't seem to get these problems
Right. Okay. So
that people are concerned with when they use the terms in an invariant way.
yeah. Okay. So I
Because
think that. Go on. Sorry.
well, yeah, with invariant justification, it's like, how do I show from nothing? I don't get anything in the starting set, including a logic. So there's no means to make any inference, right? It's like, how do I show without any means to make an inference or any propositions to make the inference from that P? It's like, I mean, I don't think you can. Like, I don't even know if we can talk about can in that context, or if that even makes sense when there's not a logic in play. But it's like that's the kind of thing that it becomes hard to even understand. Like, yeah, like I don't know exactly what we're talking about there, and it definitely is not something I'm sure I can do, right? So I don't know what people are getting all like hung up on with that. Yeah.
Okay. Now you said something about there being nothing in the starting set. Is that like part of contextualism, or is that like part of just one of
Well,
those like yeah.
yeah, that's an epistemic context where the starting set is nothing.
Okay.
So like that's kind of like the most skeptical context. No external world, no consciousness existing, no anything. You got no propositions, and you have to make some inference from that.
Okay.
And I don't even know. There's this further kind of thing that I need to think about, which is like you have a logic, but when you talk about adding stuff into the set, you're assuming there's some logic. So is it kind of like we set up some sort of rule about how to think about this, where it's like, if one of the propositions in the set is like that this logic is acceptable or whatever, then you get to make inferences using it or something like that. I guess I have a question about how to incorporate logic into thinking about contextualism, because logic isn't really like a proposition. It's like this kind of procedure you do with inferences. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so alrighty. Now,
But yeah, the empty set, it just means that empty set has nothing. So I guess I'm saying that if we talk about what can you infer from there, you might say you can infer tautologies or something like that, right? But I kind of feel like that's missing the point or something, because you're using a logic when you do that, right? And I think having an empty starting set is supposed to mean you don't have a logic. So it feels like we need, when we do an analysis like that, to have some rule or something, like whether you can use a logic or not, like depends on if a proposition in the starting set is like, like logic is allowed, or this logic is acceptable in this context or whatever. So, but the point is, like, I don't even know, it gets to a point that I don't even try to think about those things, because when you start saying, how do you think when I remove like all of the kind of pillars of thinking, it's like, I don't even know if I can fucking make sense of anything like that. And I feel like I tread the borders of even knowing if it makes any sense to start talking about proof from the empty set. That might be even a confused way to speak.
Okay, so now we can actually
those
talk
kind of
about.
things, yeah.
I was just going to say, we can actually start to talk about whether or not the notion of the empty set is even coherent. So,
Of course it is. It's just a set of no propositions.
Okay. Can you rephrase what you were saying the empty set corresponds to? Is it like the skeptical, the ultimate skeptical context?
Yeah, you have an epistemic context that you're operating in, and it's composed of some propositions, and that set of propositions could be empty.
Okay. So now, in context of, say, for instance, like someone's actually exists.
Yeah, I think I actually just figured out the answer to the thing that I was worrying about there. I think that the person asking what can you justify, that question is presupposing some notion of logic. So they must mean according to some logic when they pose the question. So I think that probably dictates what kind of things you can. Yeah, I think that's what dials in what logic you're supposed to like have in mind when you think about the question. So yeah, okay.
All right. Have you done any sort of like reading on non-inferential justification?
I've had conversations about it and read a little bit about it.
Okay. Do you see any sort of problems with non-inferential justification?
I just have no idea what people are talking about. I take justification to mean deduction from a starting set of premises. Like I don't know if justification isn't like basically analytically connected to like inference. Like I just don't even know what it means.
Okay. So empirical justification, would that be like an incoherent concept to you?
I don't really understand what is being added when you say empirical justification. Does that mean justification of some proposition that's empirical?
Yeah.
Like some proposition about the real world as opposed to some proposition about like math or something?
Yeah.
Sure. That's fine. You can have justification about different kinds of propositions.
Right. Now.
And all that justification is inferential. I don't know what non-inferential justification is supposed to mean.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Once again, language barrier here. Fuck. Fuck. This is so tricky. So when we're talking about experiencing something, I don't think that there's any sort of like inference involved in, say, for instance, I'm experiencing that I'm talking to someone, and that I'm talking into a mic or something to that effect. I'm not sure if there's any sort of inference involved in that, but I feel like there's some sort of justification involved there. I mean, you tell me, like, what heads or tails do you make of that?
Do I think that you can justify the proposition that you're talking to me right now?
That I am justified because or in virtue of me
When you
experiencing.
say, again, like when you say you are justified, it's like you're talking about justification like it's this like weird like object out there or something. Like are you asking if within like a mundane epistemic context you'd be able to provide justification for the proposition that we're talking right now?
Yeah, and in a
Yeah, I
non-inferential
think
sense.
so. No, I don't know what the fuck that even means.
Okay,
But I
that's fair.
think
That's
that you
fair.
could probably provide, like, you could be like, if my sense perception is accurate and I perceive that I'm having a conversation on Discord, then we're having a conversation on Discord. My sense perception is accurate, and I
Mm.
perceive that we're having a conversation on Discord, therefore we're having a conversation on Discord. So if you get those things in the starting set, it's pretty easy to make an inference like that, right?
Yes, but the act of deriving those things into the starting set doesn't seem like it.
That's some weird shit. What do you mean
Yeah,
deriving them into the starting set? You're talking about the starting set like it needs justification or something. Like that's like confusing the notion of what
yeah.
justification is.
Right.
Justification is just that which is deducible validly from the starting set in some given epistemic context.
Oh, right. Yeah, so I guess it could
If you
be.
talk about if you want to ask whether the starting set is justified, technically the starting set is always justified in its own epistemic context because
Yeah,
any proposition entails itself, right?
yeah,
So we're always going to say if we're operating in an epistemic context where we take for granted the existence of external minds, or I I said other minds and external world at the same time, but whatever. If we're operating in a context where that's in the starting set, then sure, it's justified because to be justified is just to be inferable validly from the starting set, and anything is inferable
yeah.
from itself, right?
Okay. I think I know where to take this though, because before I remember you said that you had to assume that your sense perception is reliable. Could you walk me through what you mean by
What?
sense perception being reliable?
Wait, when I said I was just giving there's just an example. We don't want to get hung up on like the details of like sense perception or like causal uniformity or something. The big picture to take from that is just that there's certain basic assumptions, and once you have those in place, building deductions to justify mundane propositions like about what you had for
Yeah.
breakfast is not difficult anymore.
Yeah, right. But then again, of course, you also get those people who will have really odd assumptions, such as like they have to presuppose God type thing. So there obviously seems something off or wrong in some sense about those presuppositions that they would probably put in like the starter set. Um,
Um, well, if the concern is whether a presuppositionalist within their own epistemic context could be just as justified as you, I take it that they could be, right?
mm,
Because I take justification to be, again, it's like if that sounds weird to you, it's probably just because you're using some robust notion of justification, according to
yeah.
which that's a strange claim. You think about it according to my own understanding of the term, though, it's like it's kind of obvious, right? Like,
Mhm.
of course, a presuppositionalist can operate within an epistemic context where God exists, and then it's justified that God exists because God exists entails that God exists.
Yeah.
Like that's not this. We could do that too. The thing when you say there's something that feels wrong about it, because you're going, I don't see how I can get to that within my epistemic context, right?
Mm,
And if you're hungry for some weird notion of like justified but not with respect to any context, right? Because the charitable interpretation of invariant justification is that you're talking about justification from the empty set or something, maybe that's uncharitable for some reason I'm not appreciating, but I think that's charitable. What's
mhm.
like even less charitable, but what I think might actually be warranted given the kind of things you're saying, is that invariant justification means justified but not with respect to any epistemic context, and that
Yeah.
I just don't yeah, if that's what you mean, that's the same as when moral realist. I just have no fucking idea what you're even talking about.
Yeah,
And
okay,
is that by any chance what you mean?
that is exactly what I mean, and that's where
Yeah,
this
it's
conversation is
just
gonna
like
bottom out. Yeah.
yeah.
Unfortunate, but like
Yeah,
Yeah,
what it, like
I'll
what
have to hit
because
the
what do you
books.
even mean by like what does justify mean then? Like I don't even understand it. What's it supposed to what does it mean to justify something without respect to any context? Like
Mm.
to justify P is to show that P is deducible from some set of propositions.
Right.
Like I literally I'm without concept in the same way as when the realist talks about these external norms. I'm just like I just don't know. I don't know what they mean.
Mm.
So there's now. I just want to be clear that I'm not saying that everyone who's not a contextualist has an incoherent notion of justification. Right? That's not what I'm saying. I think that there's a charitable, at least what seems right now to me charitable, interpretation of invariant justification, where it's kind of like justification from the empty set. Like that doesn't seem like incoherent, right?
Yeah.
It just seems very hard or like impossible to provide or something. Maybe you can still justify tautologies. Like I don't fucking know, but there's an interpretation where I'm not going to raise a critique about even understanding what they mean. It's the one where they say justified, but not with respect to any context, not even the kind of ultimately skeptical like empty set context. Just justified, whatever that means. That's when I don't know what you're talking about. It's like when people say just moral. It's like what does that mean? What are you
Yeah, no
talking
shit.
about?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so I think the problem that I'm looking to resolve is literally my own problem, essentially.
I feel like you
So,
say that every time that we talk, and then
yeah,
come
I
back
feel like I say
with
that as well.
another version of the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah, so, once
You
again,
need
I'm
to just
probably gonna have to hit the
abandon
books.
realism.
Okay.
You need to just give in to the dark side, Darren. Like just realize that the world can still be a beautiful place without like spooky shit there. Just like
Yeah,
religious people who've like converted
absolutely.
away from their religion, and
But
it'll
that
all be okay. You can come to anti-realism and join us and just be happy. Not have to worry yourself every day about like how to make sense of some like insane ontology, you know, be able to just
yeah,
laugh at people like perspective flaw, right? Like all the good stuff. You could just come to the good side.
right, yeah, like, but this is exactly the thing. Like, I do see the viability of your of the specific view. Like I said before, I don't think that there's any sort of problems in your view that I'm attempting to resolve. Rather, I'm trying to figure out a way to augment it in a way that would actually be able to do something similar to what your view does in terms of justification within context,
Yeah,
but
but
irrespective of context.
yeah, but but that sounds like a nice way to say it. Like I'm not really saying there's any problem with your view. I'm just trying to augment it. It's like, but what you really mean is there's a massive problem with your view, and it's that it's not this like weird realism shit, and I want to
Mm.
fix it so it is. I mean, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
I
think I
don't know.
still get what you mean.
I don't get it because the thing is like I kind of think that like I said this in my talk with Joe, like I feel like the only way I can think to make any progress on this is we need to develop some kind of like shared phenomenological lexicon or something.
Yes.
I know it sounds so weird to bring up like phenomenology in a conversation like this, but like it's like with the realists, like I have no clue what the fuck they're talking about. And
Yeah.
it's the same here. Like I don't know what the fuck you mean, right? So like I almost want us to somehow build up some kind of like we need somehow to get a mapping from your experiences to mine
Yeah.
so I know what the fuck you mean when you're talking about some of these things, right?
I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think I remember hearing you say that before, like at the end of the conversation, but that is so fucking true. The whole phenomenological approach of like mapping and shit, like that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out a way to formalize. Like if we could formalize
Well,
that.
unluckily, I think for that solution, although I guess it's possible it could still show something desirable from my side.
Mhm.
I don't know if it can succeed because I suspect that none of you are actually making any sense. Like I think you're all
Mm,
just crazy, right?
right.
Yeah. So I suspect that we either will like not be able to build that lexicon or like attempting to build it will just make realism look like even more insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean I do kind of welcome you to do it because it's literally the only way to possibly make progress in this conversation. And I've had this conversation also with like Lance and a bunch of these people. Like the fact that this isn't like priority number one to realists is like just insane to me because this is
No
like
shit.
it's like this is like literal. Well, okay, yeah, fair. You know what? Fair enough because you always, every time I hear from you, are concerned about some version of like how the fuck do I explain what the fuck I'm talking about? So credit to you. But yeah, I wish there were more people who are focused on that. And I also wish that you would somehow, like, I mean, I could be wrong, but I just feel like for some reason it's like you can't, like, you never consider the possibility that what you're saying just doesn't make any fucking sense. It doesn't refer to anything. It's just like gibberish, and just like start it over from the start and just ask, like, why would I need to introduce a concept like that? Like, what is that even doing for me? Why is it so important to have this weird shit, like some kind of privileged, like, moral or epistemic perspective? Like, why do I care about that? Because I think, in all honesty, and maybe you'll find this obnoxious or whatever, but I really don't say it to be rude. I think that, like, I think it's like a psychological thing. Like, I think that there's something that makes you really, and other people, because there's a lot of people like this, I think people really want to believe that there's some, like, this, like, privileged perspective bias, and people have it in different domains. It can be like epistemology, it can be like morality. They need that. It's almost like what religious people need. Like, they need God. Yeah. They need there to be something there that says this is the real thing, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean, and this is what it is, and believe it, and it's very important. And I feel like I've never understood that motivation, or if I did, I'm, like, so out of touch with whatever version of myself ever understood it. And I just feel like it's weird, because I was, like, starting to tell you what I think would be a good philosophical task, which is, like, trying to do the shared phenomenological lexicon building, because I do believe that, but it's like, what I really think, though, is just that there's some psychological thing that you're not noticing that's, like, making you keep rationalizing this weird shit. And I almost feel like the real way to make progress on the topic is almost to, like, examine that. Like, why the fuck does this need to be true? Like, you know what I'm saying? Maybe you find that irritating. I don't know. But,
no. Like, I completely empathize. This is the exact same issue that I have with other realists as well. Like, if there's one, like, group of people that I hate the most, it's fucking other realists. So,
good. I hate them the most too. We can agree.
Yeah, so basically, I think it's literally because I fucking suck at using language. I fucking suck at doing so.
I don't think you suck at using language. I think it's your ideas that are hampering you, not your language.
But here's the thing: when you were talking about the phenomenological mapping, I think that's exactly what I was trying to convey from the get-go. That sounds like the closest thing to what I was attempting to say. So,
okay.
It may actually just be that I have an inadequate vocabulary to convey things concisely because I've been around too many people like perspective philosophy.
Yeah, that's a bad idea. That's going to corrupt your mind.
Yeah, no shit.
Yeah, like, yeah. I mean, I do think it's an important thing to do, build a shared phenomenological lexicon, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I hope one day you can join us on the dark side, and just one day you don't need, I nicknamed Insup robust about everything. And that's what I feel like about you too, Darren. Like, you have this impulse to be robust about everything. And it's okay to just not be. It's like, the world will still be there. Well, I mean, I can only prove that in some epistemic context, but, that's okay.
Yeah, of course. But, like, I mean, look, I guess you're right about the whole psychological thing. So basically, when I was like 17 or 18, I had my first coming like into contact with Darth Dawkins. And basically, he's the person who got me into philosophy to begin with. So my whole goal was either to basically break down his worldview or try to satisfactorily answer his questions. And
okay.
That's essentially.
So you're almost trying to. So when you say a bunch of gibberishy stuff, you almost mean to say that you're not even fully committed to that. You're almost going like, okay, let's say this works. This thing Ask Yourself is saying right now, or Isaac is saying right now. I don't know why the fuck I refer to myself by my channel name. I never do that. But this thing Isaac is saying right now, let's say it does make sense. How would Darth fucking push me on it? And then you say some kind of thing like what you picture his worldview or his criticism being.
Yeah. Yes, that is actually pretty fucking accurate.
Okay, well then maybe the way to put your mind at ease about some of this is just to talk about how to like deal with presup bullshit about justification. Like when the presuppositional, because like there's just a pattern to all of it. Okay, the answer to presup is not like they're going to ask you, how do you ground logic? How do you ground the existence of the external world? How do you do this? How do you do that? And the whole thing is that that's like this big cluster of like perennial questions in philosophy that, you know, unless you do the equivalent of like winning like, you know, 8 like Nobel Prizes in like science or something, but with philosophy, right? You like, you know, solve like all these like major problems. Like you're just not going to really have answers to that. So what people do is they put these like bandages. They try to bandage their worldview in all these ways, to, like deal with presup. And it's like it's like trying to like put like duct tape on a leaking like bucket or something, right? It's like there's just so many foundational things that require so much work and that are so tricky that like if you get into that wrong frame where you start thinking you have to be able to make sense of all those things, presup can seem very like daunting. So I think there's really just a few kind of core things that you need to understand. And if you understand those things, then presup sort of like disintegrates and you don't need to have like a ton of advanced knowledge of like everything from like, you know, views on like causation to like, you know, I don't know about like minds, like all sorts of shit. Like I don't think the answer to presup is building this massive philosophy tool chest. I think it's like there's a very simple little skill set, roughly semantic analysis, some formal logic, and like a bit of understanding of kind of like epistemology, things like contextualism, that pretty much like, I mean, I could throw more into the picture, but that's like enough to just kind of annihilate like presup debaters, right?
Yeah.
Like, so say that they ask you these things, right? Like we all know that like however you start the conversation, whatever you do, you just try to flip it around and start asking you, justify logic, justify, you know, that your mind exists. Like just some retarded shit, right? It's like, why not give the contextualist response, right? What do you mean when you say justify? Are you saying show that it's deducible from some epistemic context? Because sure, I can gladly do that. Or are you talking about contextless justification, in which case I literally don't even know what you mean, right?
Right.
Or are you talking about justification from the empty set, in which case, yeah, that's coherent. I don't think I can do that, but you can't either, right? Because if we talk about from the empty set, you don't get to throw God's existence in the empty set, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, are you familiar with the YouTuber Faith Because of Reason?
Yeah, I'll just add, I didn't touch on the relevance of logic or semantic analysis also there, which were the other things I mentioned, but don't worry about that. What about, I don't know this YouTuber Faith or Reason. I feel like I've heard the name, but what about them?
Yeah, so he actually had a running in with Darth Dawkins, and basically he is a foundationalist. He also does believe in non-inferential justification. Now, the concept
Mm-hmm.
that he's using is a thing called knowledge by acquaintance. Basically, there's like 3 poles to it that need to be, like there's 3 criteria that need to be established through what's called, acquaintance. In order for you to have like foundational non-inferentially justified knowledge. And it's basically you have to have acquaintance with the thought that X, you have to have acquaintance with the fact that X, and you have to have acquaintance with the correspondence between the thought and fact that X. So that would be some sort of non-conceptual awareness, something that we'd have prior to even having language acquisition. So it's not propositional. It'd be something that can only be satisfied in some sort of like either physical context or just something to that effect, like a causal context, or if you want to get fucking autistic about it, like a grounding metaphysical context or some shit like that. Basically, like so Darth wasn't having that, because of
Right.
course, like he believes in something to the effect where you have to have these types of presuppositions. You can't start from having like experiences. You have to have a very specific like starting set, which includes grounding in the existence of God. So I find his use still kind of interesting, because it seems to me that the concept of knowledge by acquaintance does have the potential to be defended as a form of non-inferential justification, and it's been pretty thoroughly defended in the epistemic literature. I mean, I wouldn't be probably the best person to defend it, but it's definitely like food for thought at the very least that there's like a possibility for non-inferential justification.
Well, I didn't really understand when you talked about the justification being non-propositional. That sounds even harder to understand than non-inferential.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. Like, if this is a guy who's put a bunch of time into thinking about philosophy, like whether his view is something I'd agree with or not, he's probably enough to like, frustrate Darth, because Darth is like, a blue belt who really likes to like prey on white belts.
Yeah.
Darth doesn't particularly like running into higher belts unless they play really kids gloves with him, like Malpass did for a long time. But the second that you've got the combination of being a higher belt and not playing with kids gloves, because as long as you lack one of those, it's fine. If you're a higher belt but you play with kids gloves, that's fine. Or if you're not a higher belt but you don't play with kids gloves, you're an asshole, that's fine. He'll kind of deal with both those people. But the people he just has no interest at all in dealing with are people who have both those qualities. Yeah, so I'm sure this guy was not fun for Darth if he was, knowledgeable or whatever. Did he put up with him for a while, or was this guy kind of forceful and Darth just like hung up?
I think he was kind of forceful, as far as I was told. Basically, yeah, he wouldn't budge past, like, I think the notion of the autonomy of reason. Because, of course, this guy's Christian, but he's like I think an Arminian? Or whatever the fuck.
Oh,
I
so
don't
it's
get in
like
the
some like
weeds.
Christian vs. Christian shit.
Essentially, yeah.
You should send me that. That sounds kind of funny, actually.
It wasn't recorded, unfortunately.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good debate. Yeah, well, anyway, so I don't know if I guess I'm sure I can't like fix your entire fears about Darth like that easily, but that really is, I think, basically how to take apart precept. I think that like their whole thing is just to try to take the offensive with you and then get you to justify foundational confusing things in philosophy with like no tools. It's
Right.
just like you just have to know how to diffuse what they're asking for and then point out that either it's justification within a reasonable context, in which case you
Yeah.
can give it. It's justification in something like the empty set, in which case you can't give it and they can't either because they don't get to start from the Christian God. Or it's like contextless justification, in which case I just don't even understand what the fuck they're talking about, right? Like
Yeah. And
that pretty much will just stop, like literally, like what that's like that will pretty much end the precept line of questioning. You just have to understand all the different ways in which they say the same thing and how to always do that same thing with them.
Yeah, that's
Like they'll
fair.
throw words at you. You'll hear, like they'll try to ask you confusing questions. Like do you think that anything is ultimate? It's like, okay, well, what do we mean by ultimate? So this is the other part. You need to do semantic analysis, right? Like very often, before even getting into contextualism and talking about whether you can or can't justify a thing, you have to establish that the thing is actually even within the category of justifiable in the first place, right? I.e. that it's a proposition. So when they start using words like ultimate, this might not even be a proposition alarm goes off, right? Like I need to understand what the fuck that means to actually know if there's even something there that we can talk about justifying, right? If they use a gibberish term like ultimate and you let it slide, and then the proposition there is an ultimate foundation to reality is somehow on the table, now you're in a position where you have to provide invariant or maybe contextless, whatever the fuck that means, justification for some proposition. What the fuck was I going to say? Yeah, you're in the case where you have to provide justification for for something that you've granted is a proposition that like might not even be a proposition. So it's like not only does not you don't have to provide justification, it's not even the kind of thing that can be justified, right? So it's also these are just kind of three skills almost that you just have to like tune them all up. So like if you're good at semantic analysis, like being good at semantic analysis is really just this is why, like, I've said this shit so many times. Have you ever heard my rants about like debate being like meditation?
Yeah, I think I do remember that.
Yeah, like I've said this for like so many years, but
Yeah.
like a lot of debate stuff is about having a kind of like meta awareness. Like, here, let me just think of how best to say this.
Now you're sounding like me again.
It's like there's an object of focus, right? So this is like the parallel to meditation, right? It's like there's an object of focus, and you're trying to maintain focus on it while someone's trying to distract you, basically, right? So you'll like notice that you've drifted from it and then have to like return to it, basically. So it's kind of like, over time, in the same way that if you meditate a lot, that gap between starting thinking and realizing you've started thinking shrinks until eventually you have a kind of meta awareness where you notice thought actually arise in the first place, at least if you're in like a meditative state. Apparently, people who talk about achieving this as this is a total side note, as a general state of existence. I'm not sure if people can actually do that. That would be kind of insane. But anyway, so there's this idea of collapsing the distance between having the thought and noticing that you're in the thought. In fact, often it'll be many thoughts down the sequence before you notice you're thinking, right? Find yourself thinking about doing laundry or something. So, but the idea is you meditate enough and that distance collapses until a point that eventually it's just gone, and you have this sort of meta awareness where you notice the thought when it arises, right? It's thoughts arising right now, as opposed to you find yourself in it. So it's like the same kind of thing with debate, where there's like this kind of object of focus, which I take to be always a proposition, right? Like this is how I get debate so linear and so focused, is thinking about it like this. It's like there's an object of focus, which is the proposition, right? And basically what you're trying to do is go through a procedure. And I could describe this procedure in more detail. This is going to be imperfect, but it's roughly determine what the proposition in contention is, where the proposition in contention means some proposition that you and your interlocutor have different doxastic states towards and want to, try to, give justification for one or the other person's doxastic state, right? That's what it means to find the proposition in contention. So, for example, maybe some proposition that you're agnostic about, I believe is true, and that we want to have a discussion about. That would be finding the proposition in contention. Or maybe some proposition that I think is true and you think is false. So finding the proposition and then seeking an inference for the proposition, right? And the idea is eventually that inference has to bottom out in propositions that you're actually committed to in the given epistemic context.
Yeah.
And if they succeed at doing that, then they've basically won the argument. And if not, either by you at some point defeating one of their premises, or by them just bottoming out and not being able to give premises that connect at any point to your beliefs, then I guess you've won. That's kind of a reductive explanation. But the idea is basically you're trying to do that. And to do that, at any given point, there's always... It's a bit more complicated than like a meditation where you're like focusing on your breath or something. What you're trying to do there, because it's kind of maintaining focus on a different thing at different points, because it's a sequence as opposed to just a repeated action. But you're more or less keeping track of a specific proposition and then trying to get the inference for that. And at any given point that a new proposition is given, right? Whether it's when the initial proposition is articulated, or when the premises, which of course are also propositions, which justify that initial proposition, are given, you're always kind of doing a scan on them, almost like some like packets like entering your network, and you're doing like a security scan or something. It's like every new bit of proposition that gets on the table, you should be running a kind of semantic analysis on, right? And this is also, again, it's like very like first person phenomenological kind of thing that I would describe here for doing this. Like I never just describe the debate mechanics or the logic. It's very much like how you do this, right? So when you get a new proposition that enters the discussion, the semantic analysis, there's not really, like, this is the thing, is you think when you hear semantic analysis, I need to deliver some complicated philosophy, I have to know some complicated terms, and it's like, no, like, you don't need anything. All you need is the ability to go, do I understand what?
Oh shit. I'm guessing either his phone ran out of battery or shit. Oh well. I'm sure he'll come back soon. But that's fucking interesting what he's saying there. But it's also very difficult to kind of like I guess kind of wrap your head around like the phenomenological language. Because of course it's going to be like subject to individual differences in understanding. So this is kind of like the reason why I take like charity, like the principle of charity as like primary, even in debating people like Darth Dawkins, because at issues like this, it's very, very important to really understand your like there's going to be individual differences there, and that overcoming those differences may actually make the difference between whether someone's persuaded by your position or your argument and not, right? So, still very interesting.
Why would you debate Darth Dawkins though?
I mean, I think he poses some interesting questions because I don't know if there's been any sort of satisfactory like answers in terms of like first interpreting him like as charitably as possible, even if his use of language is completely incoherent. I think the practice of trying to make or trying to determine what he could be meaning using the principle of charity, and like there's also another principle in philosophy of language called truth maximization. Basically, the correct interpretation of what someone means is something that maximizes the truth in like their web of beliefs. So, like with those in mind, if he is actually getting at something, which I don't think anyone really knows, um, whatever would be a satisfactory answer to that question seems from the outset like it would be something fairly grand, because it seems like he's talking about something ultimate. If we're trying to make heads or tails of what the fuck that means, like say for instance using formal definitions of like metaphysical fundamentality or ontological independence, which are things that have already been formalized and established in the literature, then cashing out what that actually would be, like in an atheistic sense, I think would be fairly fucking interesting at the very least. At least